Hi, everyone. It's Karen Barbee, baby boomer belly dancer, back for another episode. This one's going to be good, right, Debbie?
Right. It is going to be good.
Yeah. So I am sitting here with my buddy, of lots of years.
Lots
of years.
Almost 30.
Yeah. Debbie Smith, she is here in San Antonio with us from Arkansas for our little perform rehearsal weekend that we just had. So, okay, Debbie, I told you, I start these out when I have a dancer in the house by saying, tell us who you are and how long you've been involved in belly dancing. This could take a while, okay? So if you're listening, go get a glass of wine or a cup of coffee.
So just dance-wise?
Dance-wise.
Start-wise, okay.
Yeah, let's start there.
Well, so I started studying in 1989 in Austin. And, like most of us, when I started it, I knew less than nothing about the music. I didn't really know what belly dancing was. Like, I didn't have a reference point for it.
So why did you start? What?
It was, so 1989, I would have been 21. I was just I've always been more of a verbal and cerebral person than a, physical, kinesthetic person in a way. And I was depressed. And, I said, I need to start moving somehow. So I opened the phone book up to dance and was just going down the list. And I called a bunch of them and asked for their schedules. And most of them never sent it. So, except for Lucila.
Oh, wow.
So, I just went to her class. And the thing I remember most clearly is that I was so challenged. Like, I could not move my ribs. And we were trying to do rib circles. And I loved the music immediately. But, it was Light Rain or something that was popular at that time. It wasn't really Arabic music, but because Lucila would use a lot of fusion music. But, after I walked out of the first few classes, I was like, I'm determined to get this. And I just kept sticking with it and showing up every single week, So I just kept going with it. And, I started to make friends with some people in my classes. Like in that class, I was with Janet Braswell and Betsy Montgomery Bahia. I had friends and it was fun. So, and that's led me to you because I saw you perform in if I started in 89, I must have seen you perform. It was before I had ever done a solo. It was probably right after that at Mirage. Do you remember Mirage?
I do.
You came to
the
Austin.
campus of UT.
Right.
Yes.
So you were the guest dancer, and I was dazzled by your performance because, even at that time, I didn't really have a frame of reference for who might be good and who might not. Because, when you first start and you see the costumes, they're so sparkly and pretty and the music and it's all happening, I kind of loved everyone, But, you came on stage and if you remember Mirage, it was kind of intimate. There was the stage, and I was right in the back and you had those piercing blue eyes and you kept nailing these turns and and I was like electrified, like, oh my God, she's amazing. Who is she?
That's so funny.
Which leads to a funny Cleopatra story, because that was when you were still working there. Because when they introduced you, they said, Karen Barbee, she can be seen in Houston at Cleopatra's. So Janet and I just remember that, we just decided to go see you, and we didn't know enough to call and check to see if you were dancing. So we made the plan. We drove to Houston. We, went there. We dressed up for the club. And that was my first time to ever walk into an Arabic club. And we were so disappointed that it wasn't you.
Wow.
It was a dancer who was, let's just say, of a, maybe a lesser skill level. But that was the first time I heard the music, And actually,
oh my God, I get full credit for your life. I got you to Cleopatra.
You did. Well, you did. And it kind of fits. I had a light bulb moment there, which I can remember very, very distinctly. Because, at the time, I think the first cassette I ever got from my teacher to practice at home with was like a mix, and it was mostly George Abdu. And on this particular George Abdu, he covered Nasim Alaina El Hawa, the Fayrouz song, which I didn't know at the time what it was called or who it was. But that night in Cleopatra, I was just dazzled, that word again, by how dressed up the ladies were, how everything about it was dazzling, and of course we got terrible service. I mean, you know how it is sometimes when you're the table of Americans at Cleopatra.
Table of American women.
Yeah. But I went to the bathroom to like check my lipstick or whatever, and I was walking back from the bathroom to our table, and the band started playing Nasim Alaina al-Hawa, and everyone in the room exploded into clapping and singing along with that song. And I recognized the melody. I was like, oh my God, that's the song on I didn't even know at the time it was George Abdu. There was no name on it. It was just like belly dance.
My bootlegs.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, teachers used to do that back in the, you know. So I was like, oh my God, that's that song from my tape. It was the first time I made the connection that the music we were dancing to was not just made for us to dance around and shake our booties to, but there was a whole life to that music in the culture. And so that was a true light bulb moment. So you did lay the pathway. And I've probably never told you that story.
You have never told me that story. See,
well,
good grief.
I mean, you're always really good at remembering moments. Like you've remembered the craziest things, like that thing after that show in Dallas where I went up to you and said, Karen, you were wonderful. Can I speak at your funeral and say wonderful things about you or whatever? I mean, so that was a moment like that. So, and that kind of, as I would progress as a dancer, it was like little breadcrumbs being thrown into the path ahead of me. And I kept following them towards what I was interested in, and always leaned towards music. Like at that time, I think that was around the time, like maybe a little later, but I started going to the Arabic grocery store in Austin, Phoenicia Deli on Lamar, and they had this rack of cassettes, Golden Eagle, Yellow Spine. Like I couldn't read Arabic, but I would just go. They were $2 each. I would just buy like 10 and see what was on it.
See what was on it. If there's any one little thing you like, that's a win. Yeah.
Right. And then Judy actually got me my first and only steady gig in dance. You know, they called her and she couldn't do it, and so she called me and she said, Debbie, I think this would be a really good learning opportunity for you. And it was like a little strip mall deli that was run by a Lebanese guy, and it was called something really crazy like Smart Alex. And during during the week it was like lunches for businessmen, because it was near like a big corporate business park. It was like hamburgers and fries. On the weekend, he would cook an all Lebanese menu. That he didn't really advertise it. It was like word of mouth in the Lebanese community, and he wanted to hire a dancer. So I had never really met any people from an Arabic country until that time, you know.
So you're in your early 20s now.
Yeah, I would say that must have been, early 20s. Yeah. So I showed up for my first, am I already going into too much boring detail?
This is great stuff.
So I showed up for my first gig. You know, I had done a couple of solo performances, mostly at Mirage, maybe one at a workshop show. Maybe not even one, probably one or two but
not a seasoned soloist by any stretch. Yeah.
No, and I had no idea, except for I knew the basics is you have a cover up to cover up your costume, because you don't walk around in your costume. I knew that I should have my finger cymbals because I thought maybe I would need it to catch the attention of people. I did not have any guidance on music. So I remember this was back in the day when C-track tapes were
but the good news is that this was back before everybody could just pull out their camera and go, look at Debbie back when.
Although, I mean, I don't think I was ever a bad dancer. You know, I think I did a credible job even back in the day, because I mean, I'm not saying I was a great dancer, but I was always tried to do my best. You know, I never half-assed it, really, if I had something to do. And so my first time I showed up, I learned a big lesson, though, because I had recorded my music. It was like a homemade tape of Nibtadi Manina Hakaya, and it was the original Abdul Halim, and it was just the intro. Because, you know, of course, at the time, I didn't know what it was called or who sang it.
Right.
You know, it was just one of those things you have circulating. But he put it on, and I was waiting in the wings by the little bathroom. It's a very strip mall place, fluorescent lighting, tiny. Yeah. I was back in the bathroom pretending nobody could see me, like waiting to... And he pressed play and nothing happened. And I was like, oh my God, what's going on? And so I came out, and it was like, you could hear it in the background, like,
oh gosh.
Because of course, back in those days, we used our cassette stuff, right? It was a crappy recording of a recording of a recording.
Right.
Luckily, in my bag, I had a backup C-Track 17 tape.
Okay, go C-Track.
Pulled it out and played it. But in the audience that night was a young UT student from Morocco named Jamal Ben Brahim. He was an oud player. And the restaurant owner had invited him to come and see it because he wanted to bring him to play on the nights he had dancing. And he was younger than me. He was very young. You know, looking back, he reminds me of Ibrahim, you know. But so nobody really came and talked to me because I was new. And I could already tell that one big table was taken up by a big Lebanese family. Later found out it was the owner's family because they would come to support. He pulled me aside and he's like, "Oh, you like Abdul Halim?" And I was like, "Who?"
What's an Abdul Halim?
And he's like, "That song you used, that's a really good song. I'm so impressed, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, nobody could hear it." And he's like, "Well, that's okay. You picked it, you know?" And that was the first musician I'd ever met. So that, you know, and so from then on, we worked together every Friday and Saturday night.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he would bring his oud, and he was really into Marcel Khalifa and Sayed Darwish.
Okay.
So he wasn't playing dance music,
No.
but he would make tapes for me, and he sort of introduced me to the fact that there was a whole, really numbers of genres of like, because those two singers had almost a social consciousness aspect to their lyrics, especially, you know. So it was the beginning of the introduction to that idea.
Wow. So how long had you been dancing at that time? Like how many years of dance lessons or whatever did you have in you?
It was probably 3.
See, because that's really fortunate.
Yeah.
I think I see this a lot in project band dancers, the newbies that haven't developed either movement habits or just culture habits or ideas about how this dance needs to go. Like ingrained restaurant dancers stepping into project band, hard. So this is really cool that here you are, just a baby belly dancer, just getting started with that whole what's an American gig looking like, and a musician comes into your life.
And the family. I mean, I realize now I'm going into micro detail about my dance path.
Okay, I'll bat you around.
So at that time, it was also the first time I'd met anybody from an Arabic country, but it was the best of all circumstances because the owner was, you know, his mother would come, who of course was like a veiled, heavyset Lebanese mom in her 70s, and you know, so she was like the matriarch at the table. There'd be various cousins, brothers, and the owner Anwar, his kids, little girls would be there, and so they, you know, they started having me sit with them when I first got there after I danced, and they kind of took me under their wing. And it was the first time I had ever been able to like even get a glimpse of like anything like that. And that actually indirectly led me to the next big milestone, because as I was sitting around there and they were speaking Arabic, and you know, the dancing almost became beside the point. You know, I would dance twice and it would be like maybe 10 minutes, and always use my finger symbols. And you know how restaurant dancing is, you can get in a kind of a rote thing.
Yes.
And, you know, there was the occasional, oh, go dance for him, it's his birthday. So I didn't love that, but what I really came to love was that. And then after everybody would leave and they'd be cleaning up, they would put on Melhem Barakat and Warda and this. And every night I would be like, go to the counter. Well, Anwar was like putting away the kitchen stuff, and I was like, Anwar, what is that? Like he ended up giving me the Melhem Barakat tape because he wore it out. Like by the time I got it, it was totally warped. But then I wore it out in my car driving to San Antonio to take class. But you know, that is indirectly just that dawning consciousness, plus talking to Jamal, who was Moroccan, but he was an oud player. And he was an engineering student. That wasn't his full-time thing, but he just loved it. And he had this knowledge of a completely different type of genre, which wasn't Taarab singers or the Kulthums and Abdul Halims, but sort of a pan-Arab musical legacy of like people like Sayed Darwish, right? Like that was all mind-blowing too. And he would give me tapes, and that was a whole different animal than the dance tapes. But that was really formative too, because I really started to realize that the main thing I loved about dancing was the music, like period, you know, and that I could immediately, if there was a song I fell in love with, it was all about sort of the emotional content of it somehow. Or I didn't think that consciously actually, but since I didn't know Arabic, there were certain songs that I was drawn to and I couldn't figure out why, but now I feel like it's a certain emotional pitch in the song that reads without you having to, I mean, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
So,
so do you feel like that you were able to feel that and identify that immediately?
I don't know if I'd say immediately, but like it happened kind of fast. Like because, like, for example, let's talk about Marcel Khalifa versus Melhem Barakat, right? Like, the journey into Marcel Khalifa was a little bit intellectual for me because I knew he was like, you know, the type of music he used, the type of lyrics he got from different like poets and stuff like Mahmoud Darwish. Intellectually, I was fascinated and I appreciated it and could take it in one way. But that Melhem Barakat tape he had, it was a live tape, and it just said on the front, it said, Ajmal Aghani Melhem Barakat. And it was like all of the ones we know so well, right? But that thing sucked me in. And I later realized like, it was live and it said Hafla, you know? So from then on, like I only found that out later because... So I started trying to learn the Arabic alphabet. And so when I would go to Phoenicia Deli to get my tapes, if I was looking for Melhem, I would just like get the letter M and I'd search all the cassettes for that little round shape.
So you got Mohammed everybody.
Yes. But that's the breadcrumbs through the forest that led me to where I am now. But so something about Melhem grabbed me here viscerally, and Marcel Khalifa, I took him in here and I loved him. But so that was pretty early in the game. And you know what I'm talking about with Melhem Barakat. He was really famous as a tarab singer. Much better live. His studio songs were terrible.
See, and I just wonder.
Oh, I'm sorry, Melhem Barakat's relatives for saying his studio songs were terrible, but they really were.
Well, I think that Tom Petty, all right, and now you're wondering where this is possibly going. Tom Petty, when he would record his music, he would bring in the whole band. All of the sound engineers wanted them to lay a track at a time. And he was like, no, I need that energy of the whole band. And I'm sure that if he could have just done everything live, he'd have done that, taking the energy of the whole band and that audience that evokes so much more from us than we could ever just put out on our own. So now that makes total sense. But what I'm wondering is, because I feel like for me, with the music, I couldn't, and I couldn't appreciate it at that level until I witnessed other people's appreciation at that level.
Right.
And it's that whole idea of, I don't know what it is, like acquiring the taste for it. It's not like somebody could say to me, okay, this part right here, this is the cool part. And I'd be like, okay. But when you over and over and over hear the people reacting to it, see the people reacting to it, at that point in the music, something about that point and what's going on at that point hits you. Right. And then you can start recognizing those points in other places.
Totally.
And so I'm wondering if maybe because it was live or, I don't know. But
maybe
that's
that
what
could
I'm wondering.
be. Because that light bulb moment in Cleopatra was a moment when there was live music playing. And it's such a ubiquitous song. I mean, that's like one of the top 5 ubiquitous Lebanese songs that you hear. And so it would be easy to take it for granted. But I had, it was like it came to life when I saw the people instantly go from, to singing and like having a full-on resonating experience with the musicians. It was like unforgettable. And so that's what you can see. It was that I was watching them, an audience of probably mostly Lebanese people reacting to like a song by Fairuz. It's like that kind of, I don't know what you would call that, but I felt it in Egypt too. Sometimes when there's a dancer and the musicians are playing and the audience is reacting, you're operating from this like commonly held cultural baseline, that, and everybody's kind of, I think that's Tarab really, right? Like everybody's in that state together. And once you see that and you start just feeling it, like even without realizing what you're feeling, you just want to go down that path. Right. That's where the breadcrumbs are. And that is actually what that little gig, so many things came from it. But
how long did you have that little gig?
It was like a year and a half, and he just wasn't doing well enough to keep it. And I think I can't remember if Anwar closed. I feel like he closed, and Jamal was getting serious about engineering, and his parents were like, stop playing that oud on the weekends. Seriously. And so he was conflicted. And and we would have other musicians pass in. Like there was this Palestinian drummer who lived in Montreal once, and he came and he was like, so there was other like chance meetings there, and just other Lebanese people that didn't have anywhere to go in Austin. The word got around about this place, and so on the weekends, this is
one of the few Arabic places in Austin at the time, and probably the only one.
And in a little strip mall. It was the most modest, and I was the dancer, and
Wow,
I
God bless
learned
Judy
so
for passing
much.
that off to you.
Yeah, well, Judy always, was very supportive and encouraging because she saw that I had something, and she was and she's the one who told me you should come to Karen's class with me.
Huh.
Around this time, because she had, worked in San Antonio a lot. As you know, she was like working at Stefania's place forever. Right. And I think she was going on her own. And she was like, just come with me. It was a Tuesday night class. And so, yeah, Judy, she was really a wonderful friend and an amazing dancer. And I don't know where she is. But anyway.
So was that your only restaurant gig
only
ever?
Only one ever.
Oh, my gosh.
And that was fine with me because... I don't know that's, I got to where I could.
That is not your thing, but it was like, it was perfect for you.
It was so perfect. And I learned how to get my makeup on fast, to get my hair done fast, like to pack, to have my music ready. Like in that little span, everything accelerated because I had the weekly exposure. And then that combined with sort of getting a little bit of exposure to the culture and like not just music culture, but like this family, they were Muslim. And so this is a great story. I mean, the little girls would always want to get up and dance with me, and they were fascinated by my finger symbols. They were these two little Lebanese girls, like, I don't know, 4 and 6. So they would, after I danced, would always wear my finger symbols and try to play them. So they had a birthday party for the girls at the restaurant, and they invited me because by that time I was kind of like, they liked me. They thought I was a good girl. And I ordered from Soroyan 2 sets of the little baby finger symbols as my birthday present. Oh my God. And I gave it to the girls, and they were so excited, but I could see the family reacting in a way I didn't expect. They were kind of like, put those away, because, the symbol it's loud, it's associated with dancing, and the family was, now I know when I look back, they were fairly conservative. And like the matriarch, she didn't speak English and I didn't speak Arabic, but a cousin would always translate, and she'd be like, Debbie, you're such a nice girl. Why don't you quit dancing and find a husband? I didn't take it the wrong way. I know she meant it in the best of intentions because from her point of view,
right,
I was a nice girl. Why didn't I quit dancing and get a husband? But that whole experience led me, I realized from that, I was like, okay, if I'm going to keep doing this, I really need to know more. I need to understand this religion. Especially, I need to study Arabic. I need to and I found out that the University of Texas had a bachelor's program in Middle Eastern Studies.
So because of that little gig, that's how you chose your degree?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes, and I had already dropped out of college like 4 times. I was so bad. I dropped out of high school and I was misguided, and I kept starting college, started at the community college, and then I transferred to UT. Nobody really guided me. So do you know what I did for the first 30 hours of credit? I just kept taking foreign language. Because I loved it. So I had like 3 years of German. I had 2 years of French. About you. 2 years of Spanish, a year of Russian. Nobody explained that there's such a thing called a degree plan, and there's 120 hours in it. And if you want to graduate, you have to take certain things.
You can't just accumulate crap.
Nobody told me. Till I got into that Middle Eastern Studies degree, and I was so lucky. The undergraduate advisor was so, she was a Hebrew professor, and so I told her my story. I said, I'm a dancer, and I want to understand more about this culture. And she helped me design a way through it. And all through because I had failed so many times to finish school, she kind of kept me on track, and she would tell me about opportunities to get like a little scholarship or to do something.
And so when did you graduate with your degree? We were just talking before all this started recording about your final project, and it was on dance, and I was there for it. What year was that?
Actual graduation? I mean, the matriculation. Isn't matriculation when you graduate, or is that when you enter? I don't know. But so I started the Middle Eastern Studies degree at some point in the mid-90s. I did a couple of years of it. I dropped out for a year and a half, and I came back. See, I was still dropping out even back then.
But you finished it.
But I finished it, and she had told me, so I actually did that in March or May 2001. It was 2001. right before I moved to San Francisco, and it was my last semester. And it was like a senior honors thesis project, and she's the one who told me about it. And actually, I got a fellowship of $1,000, which it wasn't very much, but at the time it was like, oh my God, I can get support for this. Like, it was a revelation. Of course, I did not go on to become an academic, but I used that money to go to the Shireen El Safi dance retreat in Mendocino, which is where I met George for the first time in 1999, because my thesis idea was all related to music. So, and of course, it wasn't very advanced because I didn't speak Arabic, and primary sources in Arabic were not really available, and I searched the library, but I couldn't really find any. So my research base was... Are we at the end of the podcast?
No,
I'm still talking.
No, but it's all relevant. You're fine.
But so it was about, and I'm trying to remember how I phrased it, the way that our dance movements, Oriental dance movements, were perfectly suited to express the subtleties of the music. And it was looking at the aesthetic values of Arabic music, which I think one was improvisation, one was, the tonal system being, at one... And then and then our dance movements, because I was like, I can see this. I don't know really how to articulate it, but like a shimmy when you hear a qanun, like that kind of thing. And then I went like into things like Islamic geometry, because there's this principle of the sacred repetition of these shapes, that repeat on and on into infinity, because, like I was trying to draw something together from all that. And so my sources were not just dance and music, but some of them were like religious or mysticism or Sufism, but a lot of them were music, because I couldn't find much on dance, but there's quite a bit more in English. But I was hindered by the fact that I was an undergraduate with little research methodology, and I didn't have access to primary sources. But one of my primary sources was dance videos, Egyptian dance videos. And Shireen had just started teaching, and she was talking about the movements. She broke them down in a very geometric way, and she talked about which dancer she saw do it and how she saw her do it in different ways in different clubs. And so actually it was really helpful in my research, to be thinking about it on that geometric level. And so at that time, I think was that when you had, I think we went through several rounds of you auditing class with me.
Oh gosh.
Over the course of my degree.
Well, so I started going up to UT Austin to take classes in their Middle Eastern Studies division after my trip to Lebanon in 98.
Which was right after the conference where we were roommates.
Right after the conference in 97. Yeah, after I saw Amina, then got obsessed her with Lebanon, if that's a word. Obsessed her with Lebanon. Obsessed. Already obsessed, because all of the musicians that I worked with lived there. They were Palestinian, but they lived in Lebanon.
Right.
And they were back over there. So yeah, obsessed her with Lebanon. So I actually went to Lebanon 3 times in a year. That's dumb. Don't ever do that, right? But yeah, so that in the south of Lebanon, I had seen the billboard that said all of our problems are caused by the United States of America, and it just went from there. So that's when I went to UT, and yeah, I don't remember how many classes we took together.
It was at least 2. Wasn't it 2? So the one I remember most is the history of the modern Middle East, because it was a required course for me. There was one that was like the start of Islam through the Ottoman Empire, and then the next one picked up from the end of the Ottoman Empire through, like, did it stop in it didn't stop with the founding of Israel. It stopped Oslo Accord-ish, correct?
I don't know.
Camp David? I can't remember, but remember how mind-blowing that class was for us?
Yes.
It was like the scales fell from my eyes.
Was that Dr.
Marcus?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Really, the scales fell from my eyes, and I had a new understanding of the historical record.
All of it. Yeah. That was a life-changing set of years there for me when I was making that trek to Austin. Of course, it's hilarious to think about now, because you can't get down I-35 from San Antonio to Austin to attend a class and back in the same day now.
I know. It's so different.
It's so different. But yeah, we had a few classes together.
Yeah.
Man. So dance-wise, you said you graduated, and then shortly after that you moved out to San Francisco. You didn't do much dancing when you were in San Francisco, did you?
Well, I kind of did. I mean, the thing is that when you leave a community that you kind of grew up and were established in, because by the time I left, I had been dancing about over 10 years, and of course, you know how it is in Texas. I'd go to different workshops in different cities and meet different friends, and I had traveled a little bit, like to California and whatever. But so going there, it's like you're starting from zero, and I didn't really have any friends, so it was hard to get started. in a way. Like, I remember you came after I hadn't been there very long, so we could attend the second conference together. And I was introduced to Amina Goodyear, who has a similar kind of a role, just like you do in my life, as, you know, one of those lifelong, I don't know, very important people in so many ways. But she kind of brought me into it, and she would ask me to dance at things. And I was like saying no sometimes. And she'd be like, Debbie, always just say yes. Just do it. And she kept asking, even though I kept saying no. I don't remember why, but I think it was just a hard adjustment for me going from the friendly state of Texas to the Bay Area. It was like going to another planet and all that stuff. But eventually I found the Bay Area community of dancers and would find things that I wanted to dance at. And sometimes they were like little live music things that Amina would produce, because she was always finding ways to produce live music. If she couldn't find a band, she would, you know, play the instrument herself, you know, because she was such a believer in live music. And of course, she started back in the day when there was live music 7 days a week and dancers made a living. But so gradually over time, I did start performing in local showcases or live music things. Or when I was there is when I started traveling. Like, I traveled to workshops a lot. Like, I went to Las Vegas and Southern California, and I made some friends there who would invite me to come and dance down there. Or coming back to Texas for workshops with the Egyptian dancers back when Little Egypt started bringing them. So I didn't really stop, but I didn't really keep in good touch with my friends necessarily. So they probably didn't think I did. In fact, a funny story is I just reconnected with a dancer from New York that I hadn't seen since 2000 when we were both in Elena Lentini's first week-long workshop. And she's like, she was introducing me to a third person, and she said, "This is Debbie Smith, a former dancer." And I was like,
oh my gosh.
And so I wrote her, I'm like, well, that former kind of hurt. You know, I wasn't mad at her, but I was like, is that what people are saying about me in New York? You know, and she's like, well, you know, I heard she just got married and quit dancing. And I mean, I should quickly interject here that I did get married to someone, and that's why I moved to San Francisco. But like, the general perception was that I quit. But I never did. You know, I did keep dancing. I just, as someone who was I was never trying to like run a studio or make it a business.
So it was all very ad hoc kind of stuff when you were out there in San Francisco. Is that the truth, or was there something that was more consistent? Like,
it
were you
was
in weekly
somewhat
classes or
ad hoc, but you know, Amina would always have different things, and Amina would have this thing called the Giza Club, where you'd get together and watch an Egyptian movie and talk about it, or talk about the culture. And so I started going to that. You know, over time, by the end there, Amina and I were doing workshops together because we had a similar interest in music and language and stuff like that. And so I kind of was able to find a niche for myself. Like, people kind of knew me as a dancer who was interested from a cultural and language perspective as well. And, you know, I think people liked my dancing because, you know, they would come up to me afterwards and say that I felt something when I saw you dance, or that was really beautiful. And I would get asked to different things around because of that. But so I'm consistent.
I'm just pondering, because we keep talking about sincerity in dance, and we're just going to have to do a whole separate podcast on that, Debbie, because you've just got too interesting of a life. But
I was afraid I would, you know,
that's okay.
go off into too much detail.
This is all really, really, really good. Going back to, though, here you are in the little strip center, baby belly dancer in your first little restaurant gig, and all of these aspects of the culture and the people are already right there for you. And so it's all developing simultaneously.
I feel like it was.
And so I'm just wondering about that sincerity part. You never had a chance to be insincere. So, and I don't mean like, you know, you were gonna, but you know, when all you're doing is being in a restaurant, being told it's Bubba's birthday, it's Jack and Susie's anniversary, go dance for that table, go dance for that table. You know, we need faster music. We need peppier. When that's your experience over and over and over and over without that extra dimension,
right?
It's easy to become insincere and not even know it. You know, I mean, that is something that always hits you in the face when you watch you dance. It's coming from way deep in. And I'm just now thinking about all of your history and how from the get-go you were set up to develop that way.
Yeah, and in a way I was lucky that I wasn't laboring under any external pressure, like being a restaurant dancer or trying to be famous or trying to start a studio, or marketing myself. I was able to freely follow the breadcrumbs through the forest and follow what I loved. And that eventually led me, and that was fine with me. You know, I felt like, okay, I'll be happy if, you know, I perform a couple of times a year, and after that performance, a couple of people come up to me and say that they felt something, you know. And so that gave me the freedom to go deep into what I love. And so I became sort of like uncompromising about a few things. One was the music. Like, even when I was dancing in a workshop showcase, I would pick music that made me feel, even if it was like, I was known for dancing to songs, and so many dancers won't use a song. They only use a 3 to 5 minute dance remix of a song with no singing.
No singing.
To me, I was always like, I realized like the singing is what gives me the pathway to get into that song, you know. And I still didn't speak Arabic very well at this time.
I was just going to say, even before you knew the language?
Well, you know how it is when you study. You did the same thing. When you study classical Arabic, which is what they taught at UT, you end up with a lot of homework and a lot of hours trying to get good grades and very little ability to speak. I mean, if anything, I could read and read the alphabet. So when I was going to cassettes, it would be easier to look for something
now you
specific.
got Melhem only and not Muhammad.
So, you know, so that gave me, I had I had the alphabet, and I could look up a certain singer if I knew the spelling of his name in Arabic, because that's a whole nother thing about, you know. But I was lucky when I was in San Francisco that the UC Berkeley Extension offered spoken Egyptian Arabic as a class, and I would go to it.
Since you already had 8 million hours of language, you were really good at learning
language. Well, I think I might be good at learning languages.
I think you might be good at learning languages too.
Because I don't really know if I could have acquired skill in the Arabic language without it, you know, because it's not easy, right? And actually, when I finished the Middle Eastern Studies degree, I had 2 years of Arabic and 3 years of Persian, because Persian was actually so much easier, you know, because linguistically it's completely separate from Arabic, except the alphabet is what they use to write. But so when I got to UC Berkeley, I could read, and so it was like twice a week for the whole semester, 2 semesters, and the teacher was an Egyptian PhD student who had, I think she was in linguistics, and she had developed teaching material at AUC, American University in Cairo. So she was used to teaching a dialect to non-native speakers, and the material she used didn't use the Arabic alphabet. It was all transliterated, but oh my God, light bulb moments galore, because that's where I learned how to use the verbal system. And you know, if you want to try to learn a language without a verb, you can memorize all the nouns you want, but you can't talk. But that gave me this key, and so started me on the path. And of course, then, I mean, because we skipped the whole part about when I started going to Egypt in like 2005.
You're gonna end up in Egypt here in a minute.
I am. Okay. Guylan, have I been talking for 2 hours? Is he all over there going, cut?
No, he's not saying cut. No, this is good. This is good.
So, you know, the journey with the Arabic language was a long one, but it was a really important one. And where was I going with that?
Well, I don't know, but let's just stop for a second. Why did you start going to Egypt? Like, I know what landed you in Egypt, but
I started going to Egypt. The first time I went was in 2005, because, of course, you know, the internet was just barely a thing, and you know, I came up in the same era you did. There was no internet. There was a few regional magazines. There was Habibi, which was pretty good. There was Arabesque. And then there was VHS tapes started trickling in. And like the very first Egyptian tape I got was the famous Fifi Abdu, where she comes down in the like cherry picker and she's wearing a white dress. You've seen it. I wore that thing out, and I could not figure out why I loved her. And because she was, a lot of times it looked like she was just standing there, you know, and I would watch it again. And then the next one I got was like Mona Said and Hanan and Nelly. Wore it out. Gradually I was acquiring more, but back in those days, it wasn't easy to find tapes of the Egyptians. You know, it was easy to find American belly dance instruction VHS, but so I started to see something in the Egyptians that I really, really wanted. And like, I remember in Mona Said's tape, she did this one dance to an Kulthum song, which was, I think, it was one of them in the vein of Sirat al-Hob or Lissa Faker, where you stand in one place and you're like, So Mona was doing that, and she's doing all this, you know, and she would be like, you know, I was trying to figure out how she could do that and that only and still be so affecting, you know? And so I really liked the Egyptian style because I felt something. And it wasn't an athletic style. It wasn't a moving around a lot style, but it was very solid with the music, you know? And so it was, you know, I had the dream, like, someday I'm going to go there. And then Ra'ia started having her annual Ahlan wa Sahlan festival, I think in 2003. And I was like, oh my God, I want to go to that, because some of these dancers were teaching it. And the idea, like, I had already met a couple of my idols, because Little Egypt, which was based in Dallas, started bringing them. So, like, I can't remember if I first met Mona Said in their workshop, because she may have been the first Egyptian they brought to Dallas. And it was like a pilgrimage, you know. I was like,
I remember seeing you outside of that one. It's when I was working on my Mastery and Mystery CD. It was at a Mona Said workshop in Dallas.
Did you go to that workshop? Because I would imagine you hating it. Yeah. But we can talk about Egyptian teaching style later. But then she was at Ahlan wa Sahlan that year when I went. I was like, you know, I remember buying her a box of Godiva chocolates in the airport in SFO and carrying it over there with me and taking it to her. At the opening night. And I was like, Madam Mona, I don't know if you remember me. And she was like, of course, you know how she does. But so I started going to Egypt because it was just like the breadcrumbs through the forest were becoming like loaves of bread that said Egypt.
Yes.
So that was my first trip, was a very short, like 10-day tour. And Betsy was on it. And it was with a girl from the Bay Area took us. And it was a small tour, but it was very intense, and she kind of overscheduled us, and half of it was that festival, which is, you know, you don't sleep during that anyway because there's like shows all night. And
Right.
by the end of it, I was crying because I was like, I had seen so many tantalizing things in Egypt, like that were not dance, that I didn't get to do any of it. And I was like, I'm coming back as soon as I can, you know? And so, and I had, at that same time in 2005, I had met this Egyptian couple in San Francisco. They came to do a workshop. They were Reda troupe dancers that were husband and wife. And I met them in the US, but I saw them on that first trip to Egypt. And then they came back to the US a couple of times over the next few years. And I would stay with them when I went there. Like, we became such close friends. Like, and to this day still are. In fact, they are responsible for me meeting Yasser 100%.
Yasser is her husband.
Yes, Yasser's my husband. And so that led me into like a whole Reda troupe thing. So I started going. I would go to Ra'ia's festival. I would go to the Balloon Theater with Magda, because she was a trainer still. She had retired from the stage, but I would go and watch rehearsal after rehearsal with the Reda troupe, that generation at the time, you know. And so each trip, I was just like, I still haven't seen it all or done it all, you know. And I never dreamed of living there, but you know, I was at the time I was working for a nonprofit dance studio in San Francisco. Actually, I was managing it, and my salary was not very high, and there was no benefits. But the one thing I was able to negotiate was unpaid time off a couple times a year to go to Egypt. They didn't like it, but as long as, you know, of course, you know, since I was responsible for sort of programming the theater and a lot of scheduling stuff, as long as I didn't leave during a major production by the in-house dance company where I had to be on hand for all of it, you know, I could go.
See, and so, I totally, like, I lost touch of you during this whole period when you were like going back and forth to Egypt and stuff. Yeah,
because to be honest, I lost touch with a lot of my Texas people after my ill-fated first marriage, because I was kind of embarrassed that my marriage didn't succeed, and I just kind of didn't talk to anybody about it, you know, and I was trying so hard to build a life out there for myself, and barely making ends meet, because I started working in retail. I was selling sheets on Union Square, and the story of how I became an arts administrator is, you know, I wanted rehearsal space. So I went there and I'm like, can I rent space from you on the morning on my way to work? Because they were next to the train station. And started off sweeping the dance studios in the morning and checking in kids' classes in exchange for rehearsal space. And over time, I just kept showing up, and they figured out I was responsible, and can you do box office for this show? Can you do this? And over time, I worked my way up to become the manager of the theater, and then the program manager of all the stuff.
Which I'm sure helped when you eventually got to Egypt. So you got married, ended up moving to Egypt. And then tell us about your job when you were there.
Well, that did actually help me get the job, because, you know, it was just such an interesting thing that in the end, I went back to my undergraduate advisor like a year and a half ago. And I said, Dr. Raisin, I just wanted to tell you that I'm a success story. I'm one of those liberal arts graduates that nobody thought I would ever do anything with my Middle Eastern Studies degree. And I told her all about the whole story of the career, but So I started managing that dance studio, which was multicultural, and we'd have like companies from Brazil and Cuba and hip hop and urban dance and whatever. Is he cutting me off?
No.
Okay.
No.
So,
He's applauding you.
I was working, that was also eye-opening, and I was very lucky as a Middle Eastern dancer to be exposed to that. Like, because when you're working in culturally specific forms, especially with marginal groups like the Cubans, or, not that they're marginal, but they come in a lot of as immigrants and they don't have a lot of ways to make money, but they're master artists, because Cuba, for example, the arts were state funded. So you'd have these amazing dancers, amazing musicians, and they come to the Bay Area and they're getting whatever gigs they can, but so many collected there there were great teachers, not just of like samba or salsa. I mean, samba's Brazilian, but there was like Afro-Cuban like forms, samba and Afro-Brazilian and Haitian and hip hop, and there was just so many at that studio. And I did well at that job because I was at ease working with all different kinds of people, and I wanted them to succeed. So, it kind of became a thing, like if they were producing their own show at our theater, I would help them. This is how you need to do your program. I might help them print their program. I might help, because modern and ballet were getting all the most of the resources. And so I wanted to elevate them, because as a Middle Eastern dancer, I was like, these forms are as artistic as anything else, but they're just not mainstream Western forms. Right. And so indirectly, that job led me to joining a Palestinian Debke troupe for several years. Because they called looking for rehearsal space, and I was like, I was booking the rehearsal space as part of my job.
Book you if I can dance with you.
Well, kinda. I was like, okay, so you're booked for Sunday at 10. Can I come?
That's a loaf. When a Palestinian Debke troupe calls you.
So I started showing up, and most of them actually had the two like seed founder dancers had come from MIT, and actually, the troupe was in MIT, and I can't remember if it was still the same. It's called El Jadur, The Roots. Kareem was in it. Kareem Nagy.
Really?
Yeah. But so some of them came to the Bay Area and they were starting it up again, and, they were kind of advertising within the Palestinian community. I think they just tolerated me. But I stuck around.
Matter.
I could
Great
dance.
experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, because they were kind of dancing in the style of El Fanoun. Have you seen the Palestinian, a little bit El Fanoun-like, so not just like community dancing,
right,
but some kind of craft to it, like choreography,
right,
which was so fascinating because, as you know, I don't need to tell you this, you can look at Debke in the clubs all you want and not always be able to figure what the fuck they're doing.
It's okay.
So it was a chance to really go in depth with some of the steps that they use regularly. And so that job led me to becoming friends with many young Palestinians who were going to San Francisco State University. And one of them was teaching English to a group of Yemeni women in downtown San Francisco, the ESL teachers, volunteer. And so I said, I want to volunteer as an ESL teacher. So I started volunteering. It was through the Arab Cultural Center. And so the director, it was months, but eventually I somehow landed on her radar because she had heard that I was managing a big arts cultural center. And she had inherited the Arab Cultural Center, which was like many in the U.S., which is very community-based, just starts from the ground up, not very organized, but they usually have annual events like cultural festivals and very much of a community thing. But what she was trying to do was she was like, she wanted to get it more organized. And they also had their annual banquet. And so she approached me finally. I don't remember how exactly. She may have called me and she said, I understand that you have a lot of experience in event production and production planning, and you have a good knowledge of Arab culture, and I want to hire you for 15 hours a week to put together our annual banquet and to produce our annual Arab Cultural Festival. And at the time I was like, oh my God, this is the confluence of my worlds. I am going to be able to support...
like entire bakery, not just loaves.
It's not just a loaf. It's all right there. And I'm like, oh my God, what a blessing. Because immediately what I thought is I can elevate Arab artists and give them, get them... raise the production value so that, there's only so much you can when it's like it was like in this House of Flowers and I think it was Golden Gate Park, but it's not a fancy venue. It's a community festival. And, but it was established. Like it had been going on for years and it was in the same venue. So it's not like I reinvented the wheel, but I started writing grants for the festival, and I had a budget to bring artists from out of state for the first time, you know, because there was always kind of a shortage of artists, and, you know, or it would be the same artists over and over. And so the Palestinian Debke troupe I was in was always performing every year. So over time, so I had to go to my job at the Dance Mission Theater, and say, Chrissy, I have this opportunity to work at the Arab Cultural Center, and I need to have Wednesdays off. You know, like Wednesdays and Friday afternoon. I just told her, I said, I have to go and do this. I cannot not do this. This is an opportunity for me to bring all my knowledge and skills together. Yeah. She was mad, but she let me do it. And so for a while, I was working like 6 or 7 days a week in arts administration between the two places. And it was very tiring, but I was, you know, I didn't have a family or anything. So that's just what I did. And
what you loved.
And it's what I loved. Yeah. And I was so blessed, like, because she kind of like, by the end, she was like, do what you want to do, because she trusted me. So like I did a series of like intimate concerts in the Arab Cultural Center, which was in a house. Like I would bring in a single musician like Nasser or Bassam Saba, or there was a violinist from Los Angeles, and have them play an intimate little concert with 20 people, 27 people in the room, and they were really magical.
Oh, those are magical. You know, a couple of times after our GBDAC shows here, I've held back Nasser once, Nasser and George together another time, in a little coffee shop, you know, just a small group of people. So they're actually talking to the people about the music in between.
That's what they were doing.
Great stuff.
And so the Americans who would come, you know, because, I mean, I would say there was maybe 10 or 20%, maybe a little bit more of the audience was Americans, Western, you know, or not, you know, non-Arab is what I should say. And of that, a big chunk was maybe dancers sometimes. But the people who came from the Arab countries, like who were Arab Americans, you know, they loved it. Like the more it was, you know, it was like they could tell that I loved doing it. And so it was just like a real privilege to be able to bring Arab musicians and artists and organize those things. And I mean, there were many more things I did. Like I put together a panel at the Arab American National Museum which you may have been to, in Michigan, Detroit. The Arab American National Museum. So they had started this series of, they were called Diwan, which were every 2 years. And so I put together, in fact, you know that show that George was talking about, Aswat? So when the Aswat show was being planned, I guess the manager who was kind of putting it all together contacted the Arab Cultural Center because they were looking for local partners. And they're like, you know, we're going to bring this show. It's golden era music, and they're going to use video projections and bring the best musicians. Are you interested? And I was like, yeah. You know, and she was like, do you think the Arab community would support such an event? And I said, yes, absolutely. Because, you know, a lot of, I mean, this is a digression, but a lot of the Arab community in the U.S., depending on their age when they came over, you know, like you can kind of guess what music they're going to respond to. Like a Palestinian who's born in the Bay Area, but who has a tie to the culture through the family, but never lived there, is different from a 50-year-old man who immigrated in his 20s, Absolutely. You know. And so, but when you put together events, you kind of get to know them. And I had to work with the board with a mix of people like that. And so, you know, I just, all different countries. That's when my degree came in so handy, because I could understand like the relationship of all the countries and kind of the rough history. And I mean, it's not like I had to use that in day-to-day life, but I understood kind of the background.
Had context for all of this.
Had context for all of it, and how did so many Palestinians end up in San Francisco, and, you know, just all of it, you know. So we couldn't really partner with them because we didn't have the kind of money they were looking for, but we became a community partner in that we promoted it for them, because it was at Zellerbach Hall, which is a huge concert hall, and the UC Berkeley campus. But so I was involved with lots of things like that too. And so, I mean, a few years later is when I made the decision to move to Egypt. So it was hard to say goodbye to all that I had built. I had such strong roots in the dance community, modern dance community, cultural dance community, Arab cultural community. Like I had it all like in my life. And so it was wonderful because I would be asked to be on panels and things where I could talk articulately about why is it important to support, artists and musicians from other cultures,
right.
That kind of thing.
Sure.
Like, to be able to advocate for that was really a privilege, and one I didn't take lightly, that it's not about me. It's like, if you're helping these artists get an access to any kind of platform, it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Because I felt like it was just a matter of giving them the space, because it's not hard for even someone who doesn't know anything to understand how beautiful it is, right? It's just like we always talk about with the Arabic music, like if you don't understand the language, you can still... Same for an Afro-Cuban folkloric troupe that's doing like invoking the spirits, with their staffs on stage. So when I decided to move to Egypt, everyone was like, "Oh, what a shame! You've established yourself. You have a whole career here." And this is totally outside of dance.
Right. I was just thinking about that. Yeah.
The story of how my dance life and my professional life in the Arab community intersected is very complicated. And the summary is that I didn't allow it to intersect. Okay, but that's another podcast. But I couldn't, because like most of the Palestinians I work with, if we were planning any kind of cultural event, they'd be like, "No belly dancers,"
right?
Right off the bat. And I didn't talk. Of course, I never used the word belly dancer for myself, and I don't know if they knew I was a dancer. It was kind of like being gay in the military, being a belly dancer working in an Arab cultural organization. Like for me, it was, because I didn't want to not be taken seriously.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So I kept this
so you didn't feel any sense of, no, they need to know who I am, because you understand what you're going to do to yourself if you do that, and the experience of being with them and being able to enrich yourself by that was worth just keeping it under wraps. It's no big deal.
Well, and it wasn't even just like I was keeping it under wraps to get something out of being around them. It was that it was already more to me at that point.
Right.
Like the dance was just the beginning of it, and it was a doorway that I walked through.
I just think of so many. I guess I have the whole goddess thing going on in my head that this is who I am and blah blah blah. Not that that's who you are.
Well, it is in a way. I mean, I'm a dancer, but it's so much more than that, and it's not about me.
So I'm getting these indications. Guylan is texting me saying that we've got to speed it up. So
sorry, Guylan, but it's going to be an interesting show.
It is going to be fascinating,
right?
And we've got
87, I didn't even get to Egypt.
87 takeoff points. You've got to get to Egypt. You're going to Egypt right now in 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, just tell me. I'm sorry it took so long, but
it's all so fascinating, though.
So quickly, when I got
story.
to Egypt, everybody thought I was sacrificing this amazing career I had built that was so specific to my interests and talents, as an arts administrator in culturally specific arts. What a shame. You're going to go to Egypt, and how are you ever going to find a job? So I wrote to a couple of people in Egypt, and I'm like, that I had like vague contacts that worked at cultural organizations. I'm like, would there be any chance that I would find a job there? And one of them wrote me back. It was Christina Nelson, who wrote The Art of Reciting the Quran. Did not know her at all, but she wrote back and she said, "Debbie, the problem is not going to be opportunities. It's going to be that everybody, they won't pay you anything." And so I was like, okay, well, there's hope. So I got there. Fast forward, after a year of settling in and being newly married and stepmom and all that stuff, and settling into a new country, I saw an advertisement for like a theater director position at a cultural organization. It was called Cultural Resource in English, or Al-Mawrid Al-Thaqafi in Arabic. And I applied for that job and never heard back, because really I'm not a theater director. Like, I could do every part of theater directing except technical stuff. I can't do lights and sound, but I've kind of done everything else. And so I just did it because I was in the habit of applying things that came across my attention. So 6 months later, I guess that was during the first year that I saw that and applied, and I looked at their website quite a bit, and I understood that it was a regional cultural organization serving artists from the Arab world. All their programs were in Arabic, and they did things like teach cultural journalism, cultural management, which is what they call arts administration. They did produce concerts and festivals. They did so many things. I mean, 6 months later, I get a call. We are hiring for a program manager, and we have kept your resume, and we think we would like to interview you. So they kept it for all that time.
Wow.
I came in to interview with the director, who a formidable woman, like formidable, and Basma El Husseini. I mean, cultural activist, like brilliant, strong. I mean, she founded that organization. And she was one of the founders of the Arab Fund for Arts and Culture. I don't know if you've heard about that, but those are both big regional organizations that... Anyway, so I interviewed with her, and, she was very serious, and she was fixing her eye on me, and she's like, I want you to understand that this is a demanding job. So the job was to manage the regional programs, right? And manage a staff. And these programs, like, they would be like workshops to train young Arab cultural managers who were starting organizations. How do you do that with an arts organization? How do you fundraise? How do you... Just every stage of organizational development, like for small scale people who are just starting out. And where do you learn that stuff? You can only learn it on the job. So it was like, and she even wrote a book about arts administration in Arabic. She actually eventually developed a library of 5 that were translated into Arabic. Like, amazing stuff. I was like, oh my God. So she warned me that it was demanding. It turns out it was super demanding because I had an hour commute each way, and it was like, it was an all or nothing job. But at the end of the interview, I think I had maybe I had 2, but she said, we don't get many resumes like yours. And so I want to hire you before anybody else does.
Oh my.
And come to find, looking back, I could have gotten different jobs, because I really did have... My Arabic wasn't great at the time. It really got better working for them because everything was in Arabic, like staff meetings. Nothing was done in English for me, and so it was like an immersion course. Wow. And I was managing 2 little program coordinators. They weren't little, they were younger than me, but Egyptians. All of the staff was Egyptian, mostly very, educated, and wonderful people to work with. And I had that job until my mom started getting sick, and I worked there full time. And
for how many years then were you there?
Full time, about four.
Okay.
And then when I had to start coming back and forth and spending significant amounts of time here because of my mom's health situation, they didn't let me go. I worked as a consultant for years until the organization eventually, that director, Basma, she resigned, and she founded a new cultural organization working with Syrian, populations in Syrian refugee camps and other distressed populations to keep culture in them. So it was still cultural, and I kind of helped her in the beginning with that, like with fundraising. That was the main job that I did that nobody else could, was all the grants had to be written in English, right? And the reports. And so, but, that was when my Arabic got really good, because I had to do everything from coordinating airport pickups for artists to dealing with the technicians at the theater. Not everybody can speak English. And so I learned how to function in Arabic. But so that was like the culmination of, I was able to get a job in my field of professional expertise, which is arts administration.
It's just insane. It's really an incredible story.
I know. At the biggest, it wasn't just an Egyptian organization. It was regional. Like, I ended up traveling to Lebanon a couple of times, and Tunisia and Jordan, because I had to go along and oversee a workshop or something. But it was really such a blessing. And eventually, due to the political situation in Egypt and NGO funding, long story, but the organization had to shut down in Egypt and move to Lebanon. So the organization is still existing, but they're now based in Lebanon, and a lot of the Egyptian staff couldn't move on because they weren't going to move. But so that's why I went to my undergraduate advisor, and I'm like, I'm a success story.
Exactly. She had to have been thrilled to have heard this whole story. Oh my God.
She was so happy to hear that, because I do feel that all the events were connected. And dance was, even when my professional life, I didn't be a dancer in it. But dance was always happening in my life. And so,
Yeah. And then there you are in Egypt, surrounded by it. And I know you helped out Raya and a lot of festivals and stuff.
Well, yeah.
That's a separate podcast.
That's another podcast, really. But so much to talk about.
But this is the first time that I've had a whole podcast by just saying, tell us a little bit about how you got into belly dance.
I'm sorry.
No, are you kidding? It's a joke. This is fantastic. This is going to segue into a podcast on Sincerity, which is going to have the subtitle, Why Debbie Can Sing Along with the Song, and everybody else should think really freaking hard about it before they do.
Well, yeah, are we going to record that? sometime?
You damn right we are.
Okay.
You damn right we are.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
just for everyone to know that as a dancer, since there are still some out there that think I'm a former dancer, I'm not.
You're not a former dancer.
I've kept dancing
because
the whole time.
You're with us in Project Band, and it's like such an honor.
Oh my God. Well, you know, due to this whole situation with my mom and some stuff with the family and immigration stuff, I stopped dancing after my last workshop I did with Amina, which I kept going when I was in Egypt. I would come back home and do it, and 2013 was the last one, and then until I contacted you in 2019, I did not dance. So it was a long hiatus, and I was so depressed, and I kind of thought it was over. How I could think it was over after the many decades of being involved in the dance is beyond me, but I did think it at the time. But then I was so depressed once my role as a caregiver for my mom became full-time. I was physically I was like a donkey dragging a cart full of unhappiness, and I decided that, to try dancing. So that's when I started going to Shannon's class in Little Rock, who I'd met in Dallas years before. And that's when I contacted you. And actually, Project Band was the perfect thing to bring me back into it, because Project Band is infinitely fungible to work for dancers of any level. And I'm a good example of that, right?
Oh my God. Yeah.
I could have said, oh, I've been dancing too long. I won't, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
I'm too advanced. But actually, it's perfect for any level. And I think at my level, it's a whole different thing than the more beginner dancers, because like when we talk about Project Band stuff, I'm already at like a certain baseline that we can skip through certain stages and go deep, right?
Right.
And I do feel like my dancing, it's Project Band helped me to bring my dancing back, to where I feel like, okay, well, I guess I'm close to back to where I was, if not better.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm really grateful to you for that.
Oh, well, gosh.
And
it's just, I can't wait for everybody to hear, because, some people even last night were like, now who is that again? Okay.
When it was me.
Now they'll know. Yeah. So she's got a little bit of a story here.
Yeah. Well, so thank you. You really,
well, it's great to hear the whole thing. There are parts of that I'd never knew.
Really?
So, yeah.
I thought we must have heard it all over time.
No, because you blipped out there of my life for a while, so filling in those gaps is really, really helpful. And it's just, like I said, it's just such an incredible story. So, but Guyland's going to be on our case if we don't wrap it up. So we're just, to be continued though, everybody. You just remember the name, Debbie Smith. She's going to be back, and we've got, obviously we can dig into a whole bunch of stuff.
We should even dig into our names.
Oh, yes, we should.
Why are we Karen Barbee and Debbie Smith?
And not Debbie bint al-Masri and Karen wishes she was in Lebanon most of the time. Okay, so this is Karen Barbee, baby boomer belly dancer, signing off for now. But hey, we'll be back. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.